You know, it's been a while since we've talked about the Steam Machine, mostly because it's been a while since Valve talked about the Steam Machine. There really hasn't been any new information necessarily, so there really just hasn't been much to mention other than we'll see what they do with it in 2026, especially when it comes to that price point. That, at this time, has become the big anticipated announcement as to how much they're going to charge for this thing. Well, now we have some movement from Valve, and I gotta say, it's not exactly a positive, I think, or at least a good omen for what we could see from the Steam Machine's price here in maybe a month or so when Valve is ready to announce it. We're going to take a look at that here today. So if you guys enjoy the video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you're new. Now, this is something that was noticed ahead of the weekend, and that has to do with the Steam Deck. Now, we know the Steam Deck comes in a couple of different variations. The most expensive one, as you can see here, is $650. 1 terabyte model with the OLED screen. Very nice device. I have the 512 gigabyte OLED model, and it is a very good experience. All things considered, you can throw more money at the whole PC gaming handheld thing and get a better experience, clearly, because we have some that are $1,100 or $1,200. But the idea of the Steam Deck is that it is a good, more budget-minded option, especially when you look at the lower end that they had, which was $400. I say that they had because they're now moving on from the 256 gigabyte LCD model. When they first launched the Steam Deck back in 2022, they had a 64 gigabyte model, and now, as you can see, they moved the storage up a bit to 256. But even before this, at $400, we had multiple sales that were happening around the Steam Deck, and now looking at it, kind of feels like a way for them to just get rid of a bunch of stock all at once, as now we know, because at the bottom says we are no longer producing the Steam Deck LCD 256 gigabyte model. Once sold out, it will no longer be available. I do see that the refurbished ones come in stock from time to time, but that is very dependent on them getting, I assume, returns for the Steam Deck and then being able to fix them up and resell them with the manufacturer warranty. So if you still want a cheap alternative or option, I guess keep an eye out for that, because otherwise, the floor price for the Steam Deck is now $550. So naturally, there's a lot of speculation as to what happened here and why would Valve move on from the more budget-minded Steam Deck and set the floor at 550, which is kind of giving up their big advantage, even over the, if you think about it, over the Switch 2. I mean, it was $50 cheaper than what Nintendo had with their new handheld system. Sure, it doesn't come with the dock, but you can get a third party dock or something where like 30 or $40 or so. You can just about come out the same end with 450. And then it'll pay for itself over time when you can take advantage of a lot of the cheaper sales and stuff for games, and you don't pay to play online. So there is a nice savings just over time with the Steam Deck. Well, I looked at this and said it kind of makes sense in the current environment. While I see some with the idea that, oh well, they want to more streamline their development and their manufacturing pipeline as they prepare for a Steam machine, a Steam frame, and even their new Steam controller. They might want to whittle this down to, we're going to eliminate the LCD, the need for that. It was, remember, also the Steam Deck LCD isn't using necessarily the exact same chipset that's in the OLED models. While they're very similar, of course, they did move to a different fabrication. It is a more efficient chip, and it also has like faster memory. So when you put them side by side in terms of the like frame rate stuff, it's better. It's not like significantly better, but like you can even see just by the battery life that they at least tout here, even though it's a larger watt hour battery, a lot of that comes down to the chip just being a bit more efficient with the fabrication. So you can go, okay, they're getting rid of the older system because it had like the older chipset that they launched with, the LCD model. I think a lot of this comes down to right now, it just doesn't make sense for them to make a $400 Steam Deck because the cost doesn't make sense when they write it out. And it's like, hold on a minute. Are we losing money on this LCD $400 Steam Deck? They might have been like, or it might be about to get to that point here soon. And a lot of that just comes down to the current state of RAM being the biggest thing right now, but also solid state storage. And we know this being 256 gigabytes, you kind of think about that. And then the RAM, 16 gigabytes for the Steam Deck, and you go, ooh, okay. it's getting there. It's either breaking even or it's a bit more than 400. Remember when the Steam Deck first launched, Gabe Newell said the most difficult thing about selling the Steam Deck or putting it together was to get it at $400, and that was for a 64 gigabyte model in 2022. And again, I know this is older tech at this time. People have been calling for a Steam Deck 2. I think we're still a few years away from it, actually. And if they're going to treat it like a typical console cycle, you could say, and that's sort of how they're looking at some of their devices now, they could go to 2028 and that'd be a 6-year cycle. The Steam Deck would be kind of long in the tooth then, absolutely. But it having an OLED display and, I mean, a wealth of options when it comes to games on Steam. Maybe not the most high-end games are going to run great on the Steam Deck, but looking at the amount of games on Steam, old and even some new, I bet 70% of the games on there run within reason on the Steam Deck, even right now with the LCD model. So with all this in mind, of course, people are thinking about the Steam Machine, myself included, because that was the first thing I thought about when I saw this. I said, oh, they're not selling the Steam Deck $400 anymore. And that's probably because it just doesn't make sense with the cost of a lot of the parts going into it. Because all we've seen, correct me if I'm wrong, headlines like this all over the place. Memory makers have no plans to increase RAM production despite crushing memory shortages, right? Modest 2026 increase predicted as DRAM makers hedge their AI bets. That was in November 13, 2025. Think about how much things have already kind of snowballed out of control in just a month, where it's all about, okay, RAM is 32 gigabytes or whatever, is 64 gigabytes, is more than the cost of a PS5. People are like sizing them up there. 64 gigabytes DDR5 is people are $1,000 or something. It's ridiculous, you know. And then you move up to December 1st, the RAM pricing crisis only just started. Team Group GM warns, says problem will get worse in 2026 as DRAM and NAND prices double in 1 month. That was 2 weeks later, just about, right? And then don't wait if you're planning to upgrade your RAM or SSD. Kingston rep warns, says prices will continue to go up. NAND costs up 246%. So there's a lagging effect when it comes to when costs go up behind the scenes versus what you see on store shelves typically, because it has to work its way through the supply chain. But at this time, it almost feels like they can kind of predict what's happening. Like the market can kind of see it coming. And that's why when you go to eBay, this is just 16 gigabytes DDR5 laptop memory. I looked that up specifically because that's what it appears to be going into the Steam Machine, at least like sticks of RAM. And based on the form factor, I would assume the smaller, like laptop-sized RAM sticks. I mean, this is out of control. To me, 16 gigabytes of DDR5 has no business being $100 or more. And it should be well under that. And that's all I see. Some of these listings, to be honest, it looks like people just pulled the RAM sticks out of their laptop and like, I'm taking advantage of the market while it's on the upswing right now, while it's rising. And you know what? If you have excess RAM, I get it. It's almost an easy cash in for people right now, just seeing some of these prices. And you look up 32 gigabytes and it gets out of control there. I'm looking over on Amazon, just trying to see where we are. And I search up 16 gigabytes and it's recommending me 32 gigabyte kits and just laptop memory, $325. And you can shop around and find better prices. But then you're looking at some like brand of RAM you've never heard of, and I don't know about this. So it is very, look, here's DDR. All right, DDR3 is still safe. DDR3L, 2 8 gigabyte sticks. All right, we just got to work all the way backwards to the old i7s, the old i5s, and we'll be good. Now, I will say when I read this headline, it is funny because it's a Kingston rep who's like, hey guys, you should probably buy all this inflated RAM and these SSDs and stuff. Of course, they would want that to happen. But you know what? With the Steam Machine right now, I do have to wonder how things are looking behind the scenes at Valve currently. They say that's going to launch first quarter, beginning of 2026, somewhere in there. And this seems like one of the worst times to launch your system. Not necessarily because, so when they're doing this, they're putting the Steam Machine together, at Valve headquarters or something. They're figuring it all out. I'm sure the launch stuff has already been dealt with, contracts, everything, they're locked in. It's more about what happens by the end of 2026. How much will these parts cost to put this thing together? And will we then immediately have to move to raise the price? Because if that's going to happen, you might as well just launch with that so you at least buy yourself a year or two of time before maybe having to think about raising it again. The last thing you want to do is raise the cost of your system almost every single year. And unfortunately, right now, with what we're seeing from console manufacturers, that might be on the table again for 2026, which is wild to think about, being in the sixth year for the PS5 and the Xbox Series. And there's anticipation that it's going to go up in price again. Microsoft would have raised the price of their Xbox Series 3 times in like 18 months or something, if that does indeed happen. So it's a very strange time, not only to have a system on the market, a console on the market, but to even put together a pre-built PC, as those are also going up in price. So the concern right now is that this extends beyond 2026, that we are sitting here in 2027 and we're like, oh my gosh, the RAM prices have maybe leveled off, but they're not going back down. Because if we are really going to live with $1,000 64 gigabyte DDR5 kits, that just doesn't make sense for anybody. So I'd like to think that we don't level off at that point and that it does come crashing back down eventually. But it also seems to be very, very dependent on how things go with AI, because that's what a lot of this is coming from right now. Many of these companies, and look, it's a competitive free market, so they're going to go where the money is, especially the guaranteed money, because these companies that are building data centers for AI are throwing around hundreds of billions of dollars, like on a whim almost right now, trillions of dollars being dedicated to trying to get AI to super intelligence and artificial general intelligence, really going for it, because it's an arms race of AI. And I assume not only companies but countries are like, hey, if we get there first, it's almost like we win, so like outright overall. So it's this crazy bubble that keeps inflating, and people are wondering if it's going to pop. But if it doesn't pop for 4 years, it almost won't even matter when it does, because we'll have been going through it for this long, to where companies have to pivot for optimization, for less RAM. That's the strategy for next year, apparently, right now, with laptop manufacturers, with cell phone manufacturers. We're just going to put less RAM in these systems. So you're going to see a lot more 8 gigabyte laptops for system memory RAM. You're going to see more 6 and 8 gigabytes of RAM in phones, maybe more 128 gigabytes storage rather than, oh, here's a 512 gigabyte or 1 terabyte phone. This just doesn't make sense because it's going to start affecting. We're going to see solid state drives really, I think, start to drive up in price in the first quarter of 2026. And that's going to hit hard, like, because you can kind of go, you know what? I don't need 64 gigabytes of RAM. I can get by with 16. But man, all we're seeing right now are file sizes getting bigger and bigger, especially for games. And it seems like people really need more and more storage outright for just about everything in terms of productivity, whether it's a video creation or storing files in your own servers at home or downloading 300 gigabytes of Call of Duty. So it is uncertain times going into 2026. And to wrap it all back to the Steam Machine, I've been saying for a bit that I think the Steam Machine would come out at first I was thinking 600. Then I moved it up to 700. And I'm still standing at 700 right now, but I'm not firm at it. And this thing might launch at 800 minimum, and then they might go over 1,000 for the one with the larger, like, 2 terabyte system or something. It's sketchy times right now. Rough waters ahead for just about everything when it comes to tech. I guess the good thing is, if you already have a system that you're comfortable with right now, whether it's your PC or your PlayStation 5 or Xbox or Switch 2 or whatever, you just kind of stand firm, just hang out, see what happens with the market. But if you're in the market right now trying to put a system together, you might have to look back at DDR4 systems and just try to bide your time with something that can kind of get you by at 1080p or 1440p, and just cross your fingers and hope that, yeah, kind of the AI bubble collapses earlier rather than later, because then a whole flood of parts will hit the market, we would assume. And with supply and demand, you feel like the price would almost plummet. And that would actually be a lot of fun, because then we can build all kinds of really cheap systems. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below in the comments. With Valve moving off of the $400 Steam Deck, does that make you more or less confident in a Steam Machine price that is even somewhat affordable in 2026? Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.